I'm Molly. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the Goffstown Public Library. I wanted to thank you so much for coming to our presentation today. And I wanted to welcome Rich Masters. So he is a steward for the New Hampshire Fish and Wildlife.
Fish and Game.
Fish and Game, sorry.
Fish
and Game Wildlife Steward. And he is here to share information about bobcats in our state. So we'll learn about the natural history of this elusive cat, its habitat needs, and the status of their population. Also, we will hear about the amazing federal funding mechanism that supports the long-term research of the New Hampshire Fish and Game. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Molly, and thanks to the library for inviting me to come. So hi, I'm Rich Masters. I live just down the road in Mount Vernon. I've been there for 25 years now. Hello to everyone at home in Goffstown. Great to be here. Love beautiful library. Pass it quite often going up to Concord and just always admire it. So I am a Fish and Game wildlife steward. My day job, I'm an environmental manager for a manufacturing company based in Nashua, and I'm on the road a fair amount. I also teach environmental science at Nashua Community College, which is really the funnest thing of any of those things that I just said. I really love. So I've got a nice slide deck here, and let's go over it. I kind of like to start out these things by just going over, sort of to base ourselves in our amazing New Hampshire wildlife, and just kind of chat amongst ourselves. We're all friends here, right? On some of these critters, share any stories, and talk about anything you know about any of these guys, and that'll kind of open, kind of ice break, and hopefully, like I said earlier, we'll have a lot of good participation. It's a real conversation. It's not just me standing up here yakking. So why don't we start up here and just kind of go around the clock here. So, all right, so everybody knows this critter here, our bald eagle. Anybody know anything interesting about bald eagles that they'd like to share, like how they're doing and such?
I won't share that, but I'll show you. I was whitewater rafting in Maine, and it just happened, we hadn't gone very long, and somebody said, look up. And there were two bald eagles, and their talons were locked, and they were...
Oh, no kidding. I've seen films of that before, but never live.
Spiraling right down to
Amazing.
Wow.
Oh,
It hits
wow.
the earth, and then they...
So cool. So cool.
Was that mating or fighting?
That's fighting, yeah. So that's territorial disputes or resources, whatever, fighting over females, all that kind of stuff. It's really cool. I saw 5 eagles I was working with my son on putting on a new metal roof on our cabin on Lake Menominee in Ringe. And we heard this ruckus. It was around March or so, and it was just around ice out, and there was a bit of a hole in the ice near the middle of the lake. There were 5 eagles around this hole. They must have found a fish or something. And then the really cool thing, boy, they made a lot of ruckus. One of them, an adult male that looked a lot, with the real true bald head, flew up to a tree right near us, right at our level, and just looked over us. It was so cool to be really close to them. But you know about how they were not doing so well, right? In fact, they were on the endangered species list. This is, the symbol of our great country. Endangered.
And they've come back immensely in New Hampshire.
Yeah. So what happened with that? What caused their numbers to plummet? DDT. Yeah. So that was it. It's a really cool, amazing science that traced the application of this really effective pesticide, DDT, which is still used in a lot of places around the world these days. But and what was the problem? Anybody remember?
In the eggs.
Exactly, yeah. So as the DDT worked its way through the food chain all the way up to this apex predator, the metabolism of and its laying of the eggs, the eggshells tended to be much thinner, and they would crush with the female nesting on it. So really dropped their numbers precipitously. But a great story, we figured all this out. We ended up banning DDT production, and they have come back really strong. And in fact, Here in New Hampshire, where we had no eagles for a long time, we now have about 200 nesting pairs of eagles. So even in Maine and in Lake Menominee. So really great story. So, all right, we all know this is a deer. What kind of deer do we have here in New Hampshire? All right, so good. I lived in California out of college, went west. They have a different species of deer there. Anyone know what that one is?
Mule deer.
A mule deer, yes, it's really cool. If you ever been to like Yosemite National Park, which is probably my favorite place in the whole world.
I saw it near the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, yeah. No, they're very tame in those national parks. They're used to visitors, and you can get really close to them. They're really beautiful. They're larger than our white-tailed deer on the East Coast. Anybody know why? This is one of the animals that I really like because I don't have to think about and remember the name of it because it's got a white tail, right? What's the white tail for?
Warning.
Perfect.
The other deer.
Yeah, exactly. So, they often are in herds of other deer, right? And if they see a threat, like me taking a picture of them, floop. And that way they can, without, making a sound, they can alert the other deer in their herd that something's amiss here. So it's a really cool communication tool that animal has developed. All right, this fish is a trout. All right, and there are lots of trout, but we only have one native trout in New Hampshire, and it is a
Brown trout.
nope, close.
That's
Brook trout, yeah, brook trout, so brookie. So Fish and Game stocks about 1 million of these every year for fishing, and very popular fish. All right, so another one of my favorite animals down here. Whoops, did I do something? Didn't like me there. Okay, that could be a problem for me. All right, so this little bird over there, anyone recognize that? So exactly right? You don't even have to think. It's a red-winged blackbird. I love these birds because of that, and also, but more because they're really a harbinger of spring, right? So they migrate, and in March, April or so, they'll start appearing around us. And where do you typically find them?
Marshes, swamps. Yeah.
Exactly it, right? Perched on a cattail in a wetland.
They're noisy though.
What's the sound they make? Do you know?
High whistle.
Oh, yeah.
The high whistle.
Wow, sure.
Yeah, it goes co-wee like that. It's really distinctive. And I drive by a wetland on my way home from work, and around that time of year, I've got my ears perked, and I'll hear one like, yeah, we're in springtime. This is great. Life is good. All right, how about this critter here in the middle? That's a river otter, yep. I've only seen one of them once. I was camping with my kids up in Lake Umbagog, way up north. Yeah. Beautiful open water, protected area. And up early in the morning, right on this rock, right on the edge of the lake. Of course, the kids were getting up at the crack of noon, and I was up having my coffee, and bloop, 5 feet away from me, popped right out of the water, sat on the rock for a while. I looked at him, he looked at me. He got a little warmer with the new sun, and then right as I was just about to grab my kids out of their tent, he disappeared. So anyway. Yeah, they are. So if you walk along a body of water, whether it's a river or a lake, sometimes you'll see these like chutes, right? It's like a groove that goes like, what is that? Is this somebody like hauling a boat out of here? No, it is a well-worn slide for these otters going right back into the water. So it's really cool. Something to see.
I have a question.
Yeah.
We have a 10-acre pond, so we see them frequently.
Oh, great.
And my thought, and I've been told, they live for maybe 2 weeks because they travel. So they travel in a month's time along the waterways. so they don't deplete the fish. And I barely see them.
Well, they do eat a lot of fish, that's for sure.
Fishermen will get upset.
And yes, no doubt. And if you're on that size of pond, yeah, they'll probably like, we got to find some more
They
fish.
only stay
Right?
for a little while, and then they're gone.
Then they're gone. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So you all probably know what this guy is in the lower left. Ooh, I did it again. Sorry. All right. I have a little. I'm going to put some chairs up or something to keep me away. All right. So that's a loon, right?
Yeah.
What type of loon is it? There are several types.
Common.
It's a common loon. Yeah. Anybody know anything about their story here in New Hampshire?
One of the most interesting things I ever learned about a loon that I will never forget is they have red eyes, so they can see better when they go underneath the water, which they go great lengths.
Amazing fishing. It's really cool. If you ever seen them, they'll dive down and they're like, where'd he go? You know, you're like waiting around and then way over there, pop up and all that. So on Lake Menominee, which is right on the Mass border, growing up there in the summers, I never saw a loon, ever. And I was talking to a guy at the Audubon Center in Hooksett about this one time. And turns out he's a pretty well-renowned ornithologist. And he said, well, it could be a couple things. One is you're kind of at the southern part of the range. And the other is they like bodies of water that have islands on them. And we don't really in that lake. Well, it's more the island thing is because about the only time they are ever out of water is to lay eggs. And they don't build a nest in a tree, right? They're pretty awkward with all that stuff. So they have to find an area that's protected from predators to lay their eggs, and so they like islands because raccoons and whatnot can't get onto an island quite as easily. So that's one reason, and our lake's pretty busy with boats. But then about 10, 12 years ago, I saw a loon. I just about fell off my chair when I saw this loon right out on the lake. It was like, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe it. And since then, every year we've had loons there. And even this year we had a mated pair and a chick, which was just adorable. The Facebook page for the lake was just buzzing every day, sightings of it and all that. So cool, so beautiful. But the other thing about why I never saw a loon is loon populations had dropped a lot. Anybody know why?
Like the sinkers fishing.
So you guys are kind of the ringers here of this group here. I know that. So you're right. Lead. Aha! All right, I like it. Yeah. So as they're down underwater, they're looking for not only fish, but also any kind of critters and vertebrates and rummaging around in the seaweed. And they'll come across an old fisherman's lead sinker and think it's food and ingest it. And we found so many loons dead and open up, and there's all these lead sinkers in their stomach. And lead is, of course, a toxic compound, right? So their numbers were way down. So, good science again. Figured it out. New Hampshire has banned the sale and use of lead in fishing lure. In fact, at our town dump in Mount Vernon, there's a little box still right on the edge of the steel goods shed where you can put your old lead sinkers. So, and it worked. So sinkers now are steel, whatever, and loons are really making a great comeback, which is a fantastic story. So
I was just on Sunapee last week and I saw a couple of them.
you never forget it when you see them. They're really amazing. All right. Oops, I shouldn't do that. That's a bear. Everybody knows it's a bear, right? All right. So before we talk about the New Hampshire bears, let's talk about bears. So here's a question for you. North America has 3 species of bears. Who can name them?
Black, brown, grizzly.
I heard black, I heard brown, grizzly. What else? I've heard in other talks, Kodiak bear. You ever heard that? Nobody said polar bear. okay?
They don't live here.
So, right. So in fact, there are actually 3 species of bear in North America. There's a black bear, which is what we have here in New Hampshire. Of course, there are brown bears, which are otherwise known as grizzly bears, okay, in the West, in the Rockies and Pacific Northwest and whatnot, and of course polar bears. But the interesting thing about our bears, our black bears, is that when the Europeans came across the pond and started forming here groups and colonies, they came across this bear, and they had never seen a bear like this. So they, of course, named it a black bear because it's very black, right? But not really. So as you travel across from east to west in North America, you will see that same species of bear. It's called Americanus, Ursus americanus, with different colorations. Along the coast where the first European settlers landed, it's mostly, almost exclusively, very dark black, right? But as you travel further west, it will go to brown, sometimes a cinnamon color. There's more cream-colored ones in the upper Midwest area that the Native Americans used to call their spirit bear. And so some blonde-colored bears, but they're all the same Ursus americanus, same species. So there are black bears that are sometimes brown, and there's brown bears that we actually call grizzlies a lot. So it gets kind of confusing, right? So, but black bear is what we got here in New Hampshire. All right, how about this critter above the bear? That's a fox. Now, this is actually a gray fox, by the way. So, red fox is very similar. It's a little bit smaller. The tail's just a little bit different, too. So, very good. How about this one in the middle? I did it again, sorry. You're going to have to, like, electroshock me or something here. What kind of bunny we got there? That is a snowshoe rabbit. Very good. So, we have snowshoe rabbits here in New Hampshire. They're more in the northern part of the state. And they have these enormous feet, right? Which are like snowshoes. So they do very well in snow. And so they like being in areas where there's a lot of snow cover through the year, so more north. We have 2 other types of rabbits here in New Hampshire. Anyone know the other ones?
It's the eastern cottontail and then New England cottontail.
You spot on, yes. And which is which?
New England is the one that's much more, it's smaller, but it's also more endangered.
So it's very endangered. There are very, very few of them. And they are, in fact, if you see a rabbit around, it's almost for sure an eastern cottontail. And in fact, you can't, even specialists, biologists, they got to go to the DNA samples to really determine one from another. You can't really tell. But you'll see a good number of easterns around, but New England's very, very endangered, unfortunately. All right, here's another one of my favorite animals, right in the middle. Salamander, what kind? Spotted, blue, you got it. It's a blue spotted salamander. Perfect, very good. All right. Yes, all right.
Now, this is the time of year you bike riding around and you see the orange ones.
Right.
Like in the middle of the road and whatever.
Yes, right.
Are you allowed to pick one up and get it to the side of the road so they don't get, because you see so many mush.
I know, yeah.
Because they're trying
Are
to,
those
what, to
red
their
Fs?
vernal pools or something?
Yes, so they'll migrate. Now, a lot of salamanders, including the eastern blue, have an amazing story, and that is they will hatch from an egg in the spring and in water, right? So picture like a frog's tadpole in a pond, little pond, right? But typically they are not in like ponds, but in what are called vernal pools. All right, vernal pool, vernal means spring, pool, right? And that's because, the snow melt and the more rainfall we get in the spring causes any depression in the forest to get ponded and flooded, right? And that's perfect place for a female to lay her eggs because, why? It needs to be in water. There's no fish, right? So it dries up. So there's no fish that can live there. Perfect place. And then they'll hatch and they'll go out, spread out along the forest, and they will come back to that very same vernal pool that they were hatched from, which is just unbelievable how I figured that out. Anyway, really cool. I would not hesitate in helping a little fellow along the way on a road if so be. All right. All right. Upper left there. What do you got? Ooh. Yeah, that's a fisher, right? So why I cringed, it's not a cat. It's actually in the weasel family, all right? So the only fisher cats that are around are in Manchester and their baseball team, all right? When they came up with that name, everyone in fishing game was like, oh no. So yeah, they're weasels. You don't see them very often. They're, nocturnal. They're very aggressive, and so it's kind of a good thing you don't see them very often. All right, I got to move on to the one at the very top. What do we got there?
Mountain lion.
All right, what else? Cougar, what else?
Puma.
Lynx. Puma. Not a lynx. Not a lynx. Puma. Anybody from Vermont here? Catamount. Same thing. Yeah. In fact, I went to Bucknell, and a good friend of mine went to University of Vermont, and they happened to play each other in basketball. And we were like, all right, we're going to sit down and watch this on ESPN2. And I'm like, what's a catamount? That's their name of their, I've never even heard of a catamount before, unless you're from Vermont. Wait, all those are the same name for this critter, a mountain lion. We have mountain lion in New Hampshire.
I think you do.
Yes.
Yes.
I've seen it.
The videos say no.
So that's kind of a loaded question. So here's Fish and Game's response to that. A lot of people have come up and said they have seen a mountain lion or they have stories of this. So mountain lions certainly were a part of our natural history in New Hampshire, but they were what's called extirpated. You ever heard of that phrase before, extirpated? It's like locally extinct. Mountain lions are not anywhere close to being extinct, but they used to be here in New Hampshire, but now they're not. Why? Because they're a big predator, and as we became farmers and had livestock, and these guys would, take sheep and goats and all that, we pretty much killed them off, all right? Now, there was a mountain lion struck by a car in urban Connecticut about a dozen years or so ago. Anybody remember seeing that in the news? It was like the most bizarre thing, because there hasn't been any mountain lion in New England area for many, many years. And then all of a sudden, we got a dead one on the road. Evidence of a cat, all right? What the heck? So through our tools of DNA tracing and all this kind of stuff, we tracked that back to its home in South Dakota, which also just stunned the whole biological community, because we had no idea that a mountain lion could range so far from its home base. But it happens. So we get these what are called transient cats that may be coming through. They zigged when they should have zagged, and they end up far away from where their home is. And so it is possible that we've had some in the state, some sightings. I think a lot of people get them confused with bobcats or lynx, maybe. But the sort of official word, if you will, is that we don't have any real evidence of certainly any mountain lion that is breeding pairs and has established a home and all that. Certainly could be transient ones, but
Why is the Fish and Game so adamant that they're not here?
well, I mean, they just get people coming up to them and saying, "Hey, I saw a mountain lion," and they're like, "Well, could you send us some pictures?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't get one," or did have any scat, or you see any tracks that you can take? No. So we haven't really found any evidence to it. So it's just a response. It's not that like they're out there, making a big point about it. It's just that's what the science has told us. So, all right, let's wrap up with one of my favorite critters there. Who knows what that guy is? Close. Ermine, yes, ermine, sometimes called ermine. It's a little tiny weasel that is as cute as a button. And they've been responsible, I'm sure, for taking more than one of my chickens as well. All right, so, and they, what's that?
They don't take them, they kill them.
Yes, right, exactly. Ducks, it was ugly, it was bad. They had this really cool ability, and that is their fur will change seasonally. So right now it's in more of its summer colors there, so it's brown on the top, it's really good camouflage. If you're a big predator and looking down, might not be able to see it because of the brown, or if you're up and looking at the white or whatever. But come starting soon here and through the early, through the fall and into early winter, they'll gradually start losing that top brown hair and become totally white. And I have seen one. In fact, here's a brief story. My daughter and I were at the top of Loon Mountain, getting off a chairlift and getting our poles together and getting ready to go, and bloop, right out of the snow, not 5 feet away from me, pops this ermine. And all you could see were these tiny little beady black eyes, right? Because everything else just perfectly blended in with the snow. It was really amazing. And then, Olivia, look. And she got a real brief look and poof, she went right back into the snow. It was really so cool. Anyway, loved the stories. Thanks so much for indulging in this, but let's get on with the rest of this stuff. So we'll do this. All right. So when the European settlers first came to the Americas, they were absolutely astounded by the abundance of the wildlife that we have here and the diversity of wildlife, the likes of which they had not seen in Europe for generations, right? Because Europe had been civilized and developed and over-harvested just about all of their wildlife. And so they come across the pond, arrive in the Americas, and just amazing to see this flourishing wildlife. And then fast forward a couple centuries and into the 1700s and early 1800s, and this is a pretty fair representation of what New Hampshire looked like back then, in that we had pretty much denuded the landscape and taken down most of the trees, almost all of the trees. And for farming and for the wood products, back in the day, you built your house out of wood, you heated your home out of wood. There really wasn't, natural gas or petroleum, and coal was really hard to come by even, so you burn wood and so harvesting the wood products pretty much together with, the farming development resulted in a landscape that looks very much like this. And it had a tremendous impact on our natural communities. And then it all changed. And now New Hampshire is mostly forested again, right? I find a lot of people really weren't aware of this story, how dramatically our landscape has changed in a very short amount of time here. Yes, so we are now back to being forested. And in fact, I can see this in my own backyard in Mount Vernon. So if I walk down, my lot's on about 2 acres, and it's almost all forested except for where my chicken coop is and all that. But if I walk down into the woods in my backyard, there are trees there that are about all the same age and no bigger than maybe that, right? Plus I'll walk far enough and I'll get to a rock wall. So pretty much evidence that my property once was a farm, probably a sheep farm in Mount Vernon, right? So the forest has grown back, but it is a very different forest than the original old growth forest that was here. It does not have the diversity of age and species like it used to have. Yeah, it's a forest and it has a lot of benefits, but it's going to take another few hundred years till it's really back into that cycle. And the diversity of the forest with the age of the different trees and other undergrowth and the diversity of those plant species is directly proportional to the diversity of the habitat that it supports, the numbers and abundance and types of wildlife that can live in that forest. So after maybe another few hundred years of that cycle, we'll probably get back to maybe an old growth situation, and it'll be more supportive of different wildlife species, but we're not anywhere there yet. And in fact, in New Hampshire, only about 3% of the state is in protected conservation land. So could be a lot more changes here to come.
There's a bug killing them.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. We'll talk some about that. So what are some of the reasons why it got reforested? Well, so after the Civil War, we had a lot of our soldiers returning back from deployment to areas like, Ohio, for instance, and they saw there flat land with very deep, beautiful, rich soils. Compared that to the hardscrabble life that they had eking out a living here in New Hampshire with our steep slopes and granite boulders everywhere and all this kind of stuff. A lot of them ended up, of course, also after the war, there was just widespread poverty, but abandoning their old homesteads and moving west. Other things like the opening of the Erie Canal really changed the whole economy, and now our farm products were not as competitive as with those others that were imported from the west through the Erie Canal. The whole change in our workforce into manufacturing, the centers of Manchester and Nashua, farm boys leaving their farms and coming into the city for a better quality of life, as they thought. So lots and lots of these changes. And part of that, as they were taking down the forest, ended up with things like huge amounts of soil erosion, taking those root structures out of the soil. Here's a clear cut. This is up in the Pemi. And things like moving these logs down the rivers with huge impacts on the riparian areas on either side of the banks and whatnot. So huge impacts with that. Of course, as we started developing our urban centers, this is Nashua, transforming forest landscape into an urban landscape. And even today, as we have homes in like hillsides or great view lots, but it ends up fragmenting our wildlife tremendously still. Of course, we had a lot of impacts on the environment. This is a mill not very far from my office in Nashua. And back in the day, word was that you could tell the color of the dyes they were using in the mills to color the textiles and the manufacturing by simply looking at the river. So this day they may be using orange dyes, maybe yesterday they were purple, tomorrow they're blue or green or whatnot. And why? Because there were no rules. Hazardous waste, those excess dyes, everything else went the most easy and convenient way, out of pipe and right into the river. You look at all the different manufacturing centers along, say, the Nashua River, and that's what we ended up with. So fair to say you wouldn't probably want to drink that water, you wouldn't want to swim in it, and I wouldn't want to eat a fish caught in it. If there were any fish, there's probably no aquatic life in that as it is. So then, of course, some of these things that we brought in, that's a Japanese knotweed up there, which I have in my backyard and I just cannot get rid of. That's an emerald ash borer that's decimating our ash trees. Purple loosestrife, you've seen these around, and it's a beautiful, brought in as an ornamental, right? And then just went crazy around small waterways. This is Phragmites. Is anyone ever familiar with this?
Yeah.
All right, I took this, that's me. I was down with my wife on Cape Cod in November last year for our, we usually go down there for our anniversary. And we rode these bikes around, and I'm like, I can't believe it. I stopped, and my wife took a photo of me because this is Professor Masters. You know, I was going to take some samples back to my class. It was a beautiful wetland with a diversity of animals and plant species, of cattails and all kinds of emergent vegetation. And now it is just one solid Phragmites grove. It has choked out everything else here. And once you start seeing this, you're driving down the highway and like, oh my goodness, there's Phragmites over here. And then you're like, oh my goodness, over here too. You just start seeing it everywhere. And I drove down to my dad's down in South Carolina, down 95, and I'm like, oh, I can't. There's mile upon mile of Phragmites that has just overtaken our wetlands from Europe. Yeah, in the ballasts of ships or whatever, just these, seeds. All right, so this guy is water chestnut, I want to say. And how about this one? Anybody know what this one?
Is that woolly Belgian?
That's it, yeah. So these guys are killing our hemlocks like crazy. If you go out, hemlocks are all over the place, right? I have 1,000 of them in my backyard. I pull up one, turn it over, like, yep, got it. So these tiny little egg things here on there. So by importing these pests, these invasive species, we've dramatically changed the whole landscape for wildlife as well. So another pressure on our wildlife is overharvesting. So, and this is sort of the poster child, right? So we had no beaver in New Hampshire for over 150 years, right? They were very sought after for their pelts, right? So they were all the rage in Europe. Happened to be kind of a little ice age in Europe in the 1800s, and so it was very cold. And so bringing in pelts to make into clothing was a huge, big business here. So companies like Hudson Bay Outfitters and all that stuff just decimated the beaver population. So that's one example. By the way, so they would make these kinds of apparel. So everyone of any kind of stature in Europe had to have one of these sort of stovetop type hats, right? And so this is made out of a beaver pelt, right? The hairs, they trim the hair off of the beaver. It has the absolute best. I think there's the sea otter has the denser hair, but that's about it. It's amazing properties of this hair. So they grab the hair off of the pelts and they would put them and start kind of like matting them together, right? And pour water into it and mat them and make out of that this fabric, right? Sort of like a felt, okay? And so people that made these hats were called hatters, right? And one of these hatters in London just was, I don't know, so it's sort of like, natural curiosity, sort of experimenting with other things to add into the water. And he ended up adding a little bit of mercury, liquid mercury, into it. And guess what? It made the best hats ever. And he kept it kind of secret, right? He made the best hats. He got the best prices for his hats. He was like a rock star. Word got out somehow. Everybody started making hats with mercury. So who knows where I'm going with this story? That's right. Mercury is a neurotoxin, right? And they got mercury exposure through their skin, dermal, started affecting their nervous system, and they went a little off, right? So, Mad Hatter, there you go, from our beavers. All right, so of course, this is really the big story for how we've over-harvested. So prior to European colonization, there were an estimated 60 to 80 million bison in the Americas, and that diminished to 861. Millions, almost 100 million to 800 individuals. It's just astounding. All right, so from all these pressures of the forest changing, the land development, the pollution, introduction of non-native species, intense wildlife harvesting, all of this had a dramatic effect on our wildlife. And many of these species simply disappeared from our landscape. But fortunately, some forward-thinking conservationists decided to make some changes. So some laws were passed, like this one in New Hampshire, the Fish and Wildlife Restoration Act, Endangered Species Act, laws on pollution control, harvest limits, hunting limits, huge effect. And with this, one new program that came about was a tax on firearms and ammunition, a federal tax. And each state is distributed that money. And in New Hampshire, we've used that money to fund a number of programs, including a program on our moose. Our moose were in really bad shape from overharvesting. They made a strong comeback when limits were set. So if you know any hunters, to go out and to hunt a moose, you have to enter a lottery, right? It's that desirable a thing, and there's so few of these permits given. And of course, moose now, after they made a strong comeback, are back in trouble again. Anyone know why?
The winter ticks.
Yeah, winter tick, right? So this tick species, we'll talk all about it in a moose program if you want to have me back, about how these ticks from a changing climate are moving north and affecting our moose. So New Hampshire has a huge program to monitor moose and help to restore them. Anybody seen any of these guys around?
Oh, yeah.
All right. All right, so again, like the beaver, we had no turkeys in New Hampshire for 150 years or so here. And it was back in '72 that Fish and Game arranged with our neighbors in upstate New York, transplanted a few of the same species as historically had been here. And from the original 22 birds, we now have more than 45,000 turkeys in New Hampshire. So they've done quite well. All right, and also funded by that source is research to determine strategies for managing the population of our bobcats, which is the main subject for today's talk. All right, so bobcats. So one of 3 native species to New Hampshire. We talked about the mountain lion. The other one is a lynx, very closely related to the bobcat. We'll talk a little bit more about them. All 3 of them were extirpated. Remember, that's locally extinct. Okay, but they've made some comeback with the whole changes of our forest. Before the settlement by the Europeans, the bobcats, well, I'm not going to get closer to that again. I forgot. Somebody zap me or throw something at me if I do it again. So you can see that line there. That was before European settlement. With the clearing of the forests and reductions in lynx and whatnot, they were able to move farther north, and in fact are now found all the way up pretty much into the Canada border. So they've changed their range a fair amount as a response to the changes of their environment. Here's their geographic range throughout North America. So it's a very widely spread species. Some characteristics, so you'll see a male is larger than a female. We call that a dimorphic difference, so male and female. Some species you look at and like, yeah, I can't tell if that's a male or female, but not so with a bobcat. So the males tend to be fairly larger, up to 30 pounds or so, whereas the females are only around 17. And their coloration will change through the year. So you'll see grayer in the winters, again, coloration, snow, right? And more browner and whiter in the summers. So, of course, distinguishing characteristics, the bobtail, right? So when I saw that bobtail in my backyard, I knew it was not a mountain lion pretty quick, but also that very black end of that tail, very short little tail, right? So you can see some of the claws are fairly large. The really beautiful thing about a bobcat and a lynx is they both had this in common, these ear tufts. At the very end of their ears, they had these black little pins coming out, and it's just really distinctive and really cool looking. Okay, so let's talk about differences between a bobcat and a lynx. So that's a bobcat, and there's a lynx. So you see the what we call ruff around the cheek and area is more pronounced in a lynx than it is in a bobcat. And if you're looking at a bobcat's a bigger animal too. And they have enormous paws, just huge. There's a stuffed one up in Fish and Game's headquarters in Concord that every time I've been up there, like, this is unbelievable to see the dimensions of these paws, which are good for snowshoes, right? Just like that snowshoe rabbit we were talking about earlier, right? So they do really well comparatively so, in the winters with the snow cover because they have that better ability to travel on the snow. So this is why they're more of a northern species. Bobcats are more south, right? The other thing you can tell is the bobcat has, stripe on the tail. The lynx has a very, very black tip all the way, and it's not kind of striped as you see it there on the end of the tail. So, but you'd be able to tell if you saw
Are
it.
they light? Is the lynx lighter in color? It looks like.
So, yeah, I don't know. Probably so. They're, to see them right next to each other like that, you can really tell. It's a really good observation, right? So again, blends in more with the snow that they're more adapted to, right? All right, so if you see any tracks, that's the way they look like, and I have a good slide here. This is kind of a neat slide. So if you're out on trail or whatnot and you see some tracks, and I'm always frustrated. What is that? I don't really know what it is. Well, here's one hint for you. If you see toenails, it's a dog or a coyote, it's a canine, right? They can't retract their claws. So you may be able to see the claw in the track, whereas a bobcat, it's not going to have its claws out while it's moving around, right? So you will not see any of those toenails, if you will. The other thing on a cat is versus a dog, again, a bobcat versus a coyote or a wolf, same thing is you can make kind of like an M shape. I don't want to get too close to this guy. Sorry. If you look where the white is and the black, you can kind of make an M shape. But on a dog or a canine, you can make an X, right? So if you can make an X in that track, it's probably a dog or a coyote, right? See the X there? Yep. All right. All right, so that's what a bobcat track looks like in the snow with the glove there. So if you're into scat, some people are, but that's one way that biologists can determine a species is by examining the scat. Sometimes it gets confused with the coyote scat, but you can see the difference here. Sounds. They make all kinds of bizarre sounds. Growls, hisses, screams. Really wild.
Now, is that only if they're chasing something? Because usually when I've seen them, because we've had them in the yard other than that one time, I never have heard them make a peep.
Yep.
Like even when they're sitting there like wanting to stalk our bird feeder.
Yes, well, think about it.
To the very last minute and just go for it so fast.
Absolutely.
But never heard a thing.
We'll talk about that in a second. They are the quintessential ambush predator, right? So they will stalk their prey and get as close as they can and then lunge for them. Like it's seen a cheetah out on the Serengeti on some David Attenborough show or something like that. It's the same kind of thing. You won't hear them unless they're really communicating with others of their species for territory, dominance, females, all that kind of stuff. They don't want to give away their position. So they're not going to just be growling or purring for their own benefit. They're really there. They're going to be very quiet unless there's some territory issues. So they're pretty solitary as well. You rarely would see them together except for during mating times. They're very territorial, right? So all that. All right, so here's another quiz thing here. If you are awake primarily during the night, like a bat or a owl or a raccoon, you are called nocturnal. Very good. If you are primarily awake during the day, like a human or a diurnal, right? Okay. If you are awake and active primarily in the dawn or dusk times of the day, you are oh, so close. Crepuscular. Here's another new name. You got extirpated and crepuscular. A couple new names. Crepuscular. So bobcats are crepuscular, right? What else comes to mind when you think of I see it dawn at home in the mornings and I see it on my way home from work? Deer, exactly, right? So deer is like the poster animal for being crepuscular. Why would this guy be crepuscular?
Because it's chasing a deer.
Chasing a deer, right? So deer is one of their prey. So they are active at times when a lot of their prey are active. So solitary, territorial, crepuscular, ambush predators. All right, so they'll have kittens after about 2 years or so, 2 to 4, typical. Females care for the young, of course. Males going off to find another mate. So this is kind of an interesting graph. This is sort of the findings that we've had from samples over the years. So this one shows kind of like different abundance of different prey species and how their diet has changed over the years to reflect their habitat. So more of an example is this is, so back in the day, in the 50s, where we still didn't quite have these young forests regenerating near, as much. They were more after bunnies, okay? Then they switched over to have more of deer as their prey, and now they're full on to small animals like chipmunks and squirrels are their big kind of pattern. So again, it's sort of very similar in adapting to our changing landscape over the years. So we talked about how we got 45,000 turkeys that weren't here just a blink ago, and now they got a nice source of food. I see this slide, I think of that cat with my chicken in its mouth. And oh gosh, so feeding the local wildlife. So it's got a squirrel or something there, maybe a bunny. Yeah, right. So winters can be pretty hard on bobcat and a lot of other critters, right? Making it through the winter is a big deal for most of our wildlife, and particularly bobcats, all right? So their prey are not out. Like the chipmunks are like the best example of an animal that hibernates, right? They'll dig their burrow and they're gone for all winter. As opposed to a bear that we think of as a hibernator, right? But bears will wake up through the winter. It's actually not quite a true hibernator. So a lot of their prey is underground, is gone for the whole winter. And so survival is really hard, particularly if you got kittens. So yeah, those are pretty cool. So this one found something to kill, like a deer maybe, I don't know.
Do they scavenge too?
Oh yeah, anything. Yeah. Yep. So I said there's a bobcat. Here's a great place to see both a bobcat and a mountain lion. Anyone been to the Squam Lakes Nature Center?
Yeah.
Unbelievable display there. I mean, it's not big and anything, and you first look at it, but it's a glass covered in this rock, and there's a mountain lion. The cool thing here is, I remember walking this like boardwalk that you go around, and you turn this corner, and then whoomp, in front of you are this cat display with these cats in a very natural setting, and there's a line in the boardwalk right there, and there's a little sign here, and the sign says, a mountain lion can jump from where you are now all the way over to where you see it. And it's like ridiculously far away. It's like, you're kidding me. A mountain lion from a standing, not a running start, but just from sitting there and leaping. And then it says, and look up, that's how high they can jump. And it's like higher than the ceiling. It's just crazy. And it's so cool. I really encourage you to go. It's a beautiful place, really neat. And they have bobcat there too as well. All right, so this is one of the main causes of their mortality, our roadkill, right? So, as well as those hard winters. So,
There was a set with babies born this year in New Hampshire. Somebody's got all these pictures on You Local.
Me local. You local.
You Local.
Oh, really?
You Local, New Hampshire.
No kidding.
They've been had amazing photos this year.
Oh, I have to look.
Including about
Yeah. Right.
family.
All right, neat. I'd love
Yeah.
to see that.
I think they had 3 or 4 babies.
All right, I'll have to look at that.
And
So-
part of it,
Some population trends. So we had a bounty on wildcat. The state would give hunters money to harvest wildcat. Why? Farmers and their herds. It goes back to that again. So they take sheep, they'll take goats, they'll all that. So we had a bounty. I was thinking about this when that bobcat had one of my chickens in its mouth. It's, like, I just lost a chicken. I could kind of feel how a farmer would react if they're, taking their sheep or something, right? But, yeah. So some studies on see where we stand, how the bobcat are doing, and to compare them with some adjacent state data and estimate populations, track how they're doing, and find out what's important to bobcat for habitat. So these are some of the studies, again, funded from that state tax.
Is that ear tufted on this one? Barely?
Not much of a tuft. There's a little bit. Yeah, you can see it more on the left. Yep. Corridors. So we'll talk a little bit about these two. So some sightings. If you see a bobcat or any other species and you would like to report it to Fish and Game, we would love for you to do so. There is a website that you can go to. It's actually run by UNH. I reported my bobcat in my backyard. And so there'll be a dot on there from my backyard at one point. So we're seeing a fair amount of them on the southern part of the state, southeast and southwest. And so we did some research on 2 different populations of bobcat and put some collars on them, trapped them in cooperation with the New Hampshire Trappers Association. There still are people that trap critters by permit in the state. So did some studies on them, finding out what kind of age and size and all that. Gave them some antibiotics as well, weights, classic stuff. Attached these collars to them. So we have been able to track a number of bobcats to see what their life cycle is like. And here's releasing a cat and some of the cats that we've been tracking and some of the telemetry data that we've received. And they fall off at a designated time, or if the cat's not moving, it's an indicator that it's deceased. It'll fall off. So here's some sightings. These are individual data points for tracking individual bobcats in different colors, right? So this gives us an idea how far they will range, as well as what kind of habitat that they like. And we found in this case that the males tend to have a lot larger range, which makes sense, very consistent with other wildlife, where the males are out roaming around finding other females and all that. And so we also found some pronounced shifts in where they are found, where they like to be during the different seasons. So through the winter, they'll have a smaller range, and it's usually around a wetland area, whereas more roaming around, particularly in the spring and through the summer. And so we looked at that area during the winter and overlaid it with some land use data, and the blue is basically water, right? So it gives you an idea they like to be around water. Well, why? Because a lot of their prey that they can find available in the winter is also in that same area like this, right? So they might find some small rodents and things like that that like to be around wetlands in the winter. Like this guy. Yeah, that's a pretty cool photo. All right, so summer, fall, around the outsides of agricultural fields, right on those borders, those edges. We talk about this in my class at NCC, the edge effect. When you've got a pronounced change in a habitat from a field to a forest, it's a huge amount of opportunity for various critters right on that edge. You can picture birds that are roosting up in the trees right on that edge and being able to eagle eye down and find rodents and bugs and whatnot in the fields from that perch. It's very advantageous for them. And similar to that are these kinds of areas. Again, you got a field and a forest. Well, that is a perfect place to lie in wait and ambush prey coming by there. You're hiding into that shrubs in the forest edge and finding maybe a deer walking by in that field, and off you go. So here's one of the last things to talk about. In ecology, we talk about habitat areas in terms of like a core area and a fringe area, and then an area where they may kind of roam on the very outskirts. But that core habitat is so vital to the existence of that species. And when we have fragmented that core habitat with development, with roads and things like that, it has very pronounced consequences. So knowing this, one of the strategies for habitat management is to try to find 2 areas or more areas that are known core habitat areas, and then try to manage the land in between those areas to make what we call a corridor. Right? So here we've got, yep, I did it again, these different core areas, and then through land management, working with conservation commissions, working with landowners, trying to preserve those areas to tie those core areas together. When you can do that, you have made so much more opportunity for the wildlife by having those connectivity of those core areas. And if you look at it on a larger scale, we have a lot of natural areas way up in the White Mountains and down into, I'm going to keep my hands away from that, in Massachusetts down around Quabbin Reservoir, very forested area, very large core habitat areas. So trying to find solutions to connect those areas with land management to allow these species to roam over these large areas is a really key strategy for managing wildlife. So a bobcat is what we call an umbrella species. And that way, if they're doing well, we know that the other species in that area underneath that umbrella are probably also doing well. So we found through these studies that we think they're doing not too bad here in New Hampshire, particularly in the southern part of the state, Monadnock region, all that. My backyard, they seem to be doing pretty good. So, but they are absolutely beautiful, majestic animals, so key to our natural history, our landscape. And the goal is to find ways for these graceful, magnificent animals that are fragile to thrive in our modern world and live in harmony with the rest of us. So thank you for your contributions to this discussion here. It's a beautiful talk we had all together. So thanks so much. Have a great rest of your evening. I'll hang around for a bit. Happy to chat about any stories you have or answer any questions you may have. So thanks so much. Thank you to all at home too. All right.